it said, and chose to make himself a priest and all of his descendants to be a priest to a idol, to an image that wasn't God. We're just still seeing the moral decline of Israel here. Chapter 17, and we're going to see really through the end of the book, it gives us a picture of Judges 17 verse 6. There was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. We're seeing the moral decline of Israel here. And that moral decline even hit Moses' family, and his grandson choosing to not serve God.
That text earlier, you're looking for Exodus chapter 2.
Was Exodus 2?
Yeah,
Can you
you
read
just
that?
added the extra 2. Then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah his daughter to Moses, and she bore him a son, called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land.
Okay, so there it is. So chapter 2, put that in your notes, verse 21, 22. So that tells us that, of course, the King James has the wrong translation of that name here. It's not Manasseh, it is Moses, because he is the son. Gershom was the son of Moses. And so we're seeing that moral decline. So they worship until the days of the captivity. Well, I have those notes there in your verses in your notes. 2 Kings 15, 29, 2 Kings 17, verse 6 talks about their captivity to the Assyrians. And so they have set up their own place of worship. They have set up their own order of worship. They have set up their own priests to serve what they say is God, but it's not God. Remember, we talked about this is really a picture of denominationalism. They claim to be following Yahweh, God, at that time, but they're bowing down to a carved image. And that's going to happen again. So I'm going to read 1 Kings chapter 12. This is in your notes, the last part. But 1 Kings 12, 28 through 29. 1 Kings 12, 28 and 29.
Therefore the king asked advice, made 2 calves of gold, and said to the people, It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up from the land of Egypt. And he set up one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan.
All right, so you have Jeroboam. So, of course, the time of this is Solomon's. Rehoboam is Solomon's son. Rehoboam, of course, does what he does, his wrong advice. He ends up with the 2 bottom tribes, really Judah, absorbed all of them. And Jeroboam ended up with the 10 northern tribes, which God gave him. God said, I'm going to give you them. And what does Jeroboam do? Well, he's jealous. He doesn't want his people going back to Jerusalem where they're supposed to worship. So what does he do? He sets up an idol, a golden calf in Bethel and Dan. So Dan becomes a very centered hub of worship for the northern tribes. Even at this point, early in their history, they're already starting to set up this place of worship which God did not authorize. And then Jeroboam sees the significance of that worship place in his time and puts another idol there for them to worship. And so we're just seeing the moral decline again. And so then verse 31 says, So they set up for themselves Micah's carved image which he made all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh. Where were they supposed to go during this time? Not Jerusalem yet, right? Shiloh. Because where the tabernacle was in Shiloh. And that stayed there until the time of David. Well, no, really until the time of Solomon, right? No, David brought the tabernacle, or the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. But that's later on in time. All right, so that's chapter 18. Any questions on that? We're seeing, this is the moral decline of the Danites. We saw the moral decline of Micah in chapter 18, or chapter 17. Any questions on that before we go to chapter 19? All right, if you have read ahead, chapter 19 is a very interesting chapter. We're going to talk, so chapter 19, 20, and 21 are all one event, okay? And this is the moral decline. We talked about the Danites and their moral decline. We talked about some of the people of Samson's family that were moral decline. Now we're talking about Benjamin. this event, this terrible thing that happened here, is going to see the almost complete annihilation of the Benjamites. They are almost completely wiped out. The whole tribe gone. By chapter 31, there's only, I think there's 100 men left of the whole tribe of Benjamin. Maybe I'm not wrong on the number, I don't remember the exact number. Because of the wickedness of what we see in chapter 19. Now you could compare the wickedness of chapter 19 to Sodom and Gomorrah. This would be the more modern Sodom and Gomorrah. Of course, what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah? Yeah, they were wicked. God wiped them out, right, with brimstone and fire. That same wickedness is happening with the Benjamites, and that's chapter 19. Chapter 19 is pretty graphic. It's pretty, but it's here in the Bible for us to see where people go, what happens to the minds of people and their desires and their moral decline. Romans chapter 1. We're going to spend some time talking about Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1 is this chapter. When you get rid of God, what happens? We go downhill. And the first thing that usually happens is the degradation of morals, and there's a lot of sexual things that happen. You have homosexuality being accepted, you have rape and incest and all these things being accepted. That's what happens in chapter 19. And that happens, Romans chapter 1, that's the first thing. When they forgot about God, they turned and went to homosexuality. And then all of the wickedness that followed after that. What is happening in our country? Same thing. This is a warning for us of where our nation is going to go because of what is being accepted today. And we've got to be careful. And that's what happened in Israel. This is why God put them in captivity. This is why God punished them for the things they were doing.
So I think something maybe in a broader scope to look at, it's interesting to me, people are so up in arms about, you hear the phrase toxic masculinity, blah, blah, blah. But real masculinity is protecting women and children. And when you get rid of that, like they're racing to do because they just want to do what they want to do instead of being a man and standing up and doing what is right, the women and children are always the first people to suffer. And I think you see that today because you have abortion and the pornography industry and a lot of other things. The people that the men are supposed to be protecting, they are just sacrificing.
Yep. And I don't know if you read it in my notes,
I
but that's
did
in my
not.
notes.
I did not, but
Similar thought is in my notes here.
because
too.
what happens in this account, that exactly.
Yeah.
The person that he should have been protecting, he sacrificed.
Yep. Yeah, it's exactly right. It is, and it's crazy if you look throughout history, like you said, when you lose that men being who they need to be and women being who they need to be, the first thing to go is the mistreatment of women and children. And that's exactly what happens in this chapter. And so it's that perversion, moving away from God. What happens is the women and children are the first one to be mistreated, and that's not good. And a lot of that stuff's happening today.
I wish people could see that God's design and order for things is meant to protect those people.
Yeah,
That's what it's there for, but people get so upset about it.
yeah, they do. And so chapter 19, we'll get into this chapter now. Let's see. Let's read. I'm trying to see where I want to break this at. Let's do 1 through 4. If you want to read that.
And it came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite staying in the remote mountains of Ephraim. He took for himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. But his concubine played the harlot against him, and went away from him to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah, and was there 4 whole months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her, and bring her back, having his servant and a couple of donkeys with him. So she brought him into her father's house. And when the father of the young woman saw him, he was glad to meet him. Now his father-in-law, the young woman's father, detained him, and he stayed with them 3 days. So they ate and drank and lodged there.
All right, so verse 1, it says, it came to pass in those days there was no king in Israel. Notice, how did chapter 18 start? Same way. And then remember I said, chapter 17 and verse 6, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So what we're seeing is chapter 18 and chapter 19. Chapter 19 is the start of a new event, so we're not going to see that same phrase again till later. But it is giving us a description of what it was like in Israel when people did what was right in their own eyes. And it just a complete thought here, what's going on. But it's interesting also, we see that there was a certain Levite. Now, we talked about a Levite in chapter 18. It's not the same Levite. Okay, remember that Levite ended up becoming a priest up in Dan, right? So he's up north at this point. I don't know. I think these events are pretty similar in time-wise. But this is a different Levite, okay? But it's from the remote mountains of Ephraim. What has been the place for each one of these events? The mountains of Ephraim. So we're dealing with, there's a lot of problems in this area right here. Of course, Samson was from the mountains of Ephraim. There's just a lot. It's just interesting how they all piece together here. But we have a certain Levite. He took for himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. So a concubine. A concubine was recognized as a second wife. She was not, so that would mean her children, her inheritance, her blessings, and whatever the case may be, would be less than the first wife. Is that way God designed it? No. We don't see God condemning them for this in the Old Testament. This happens a lot. But we do see it, what Jesus says, when he deals with this in Matthew 19. Somebody read Matthew 19, 4 through 6. Really get all of it, we'd have to read the whole first 18 verses of chapter 19. But I just want to read verse 4 through 6. Matthew 19, 4 through 6.
And he answered and said to them, have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, so what God has joined together, let no man separate.
All right, so Jesus, and of course throughout the Old Testament we have seen this over and over again, where there was multiple wives. Of course, Solomon is known for his, 900 and some wives and concubines.
300 wives, something like that.
Yes, 300 wives, 700 concubines. And so what did it do? It brought a lot of problems. He left God from it. And so we see this over and over throughout the Old Testament. But when we get to the New Testament in the time of Christ, he's asked this question about divorce, and what does he say? Since the beginning, God allowed you, because of your ignorance, to divorce in the Old Testament. He allowed you to do these things because of your ignorance, because of your stubbornness. But he says that was not so. This is what God set up the family to be: one man, one wife for life. And so that answered their question, because Jesus said God didn't want you to do that in the first place, and you did. And now under the new law, God has set a command of this is the way it should be. And he talks about that later on in chapter 19. And so here we have this concubine. Now she is his wife, because if you go down to verse 3, it says, then her husband arose. He is called her husband. So they are married. They are husband and wife. She's not someone that is just not a wife at all. She's just a second wife, unfortunately. But verse 2, it says, but his concubine played the harlot against him, and went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there 4 whole months. And so his concubine was not faithful. Why? We're not told. But when we see the Levite's reaction to her later, he probably didn't love her, and he probably didn't care much about her. So maybe that was probably why she left him. I mean, she was wrong in being unfaithful. She was wrong in doing what she did. But he was wrong also in the things that he did. It's just a moral decline of both parties here and the things that's going on. This Levite,
as we go through this chapter, he's at fault also. The Benjamites are going to be at fault. The concubine's going to be at fault. The moral decline of all of them was terrible, and it's bad. And so verse 3 says, then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back, having his servant and a couple donkeys with him. So she brought him into her father's house. And when the father of the young woman saw him, he was glad to meet him. And so he goes and talks to his wife and asks her to come back. She's obviously wanting to, so she does. It's very similar to Hosea, right? What was Hosea told to do? Yeah, his wife played the harlot, and he was to buy her back. Yeah, he had to pay for her to get her back. And that was a picture of God bringing back Israel, who had went to idolatry and committed adultery against him. But that's very similar to the situation here. This Levite was willing to take her back. And so he goes after her, and she agrees to come back. She goes into her father's house, and it says the father was glad to see him. Why do you think he was glad to see him? Well, what has his daughter been doing? Something that's not very good. So he's probably glad to see, hey, she's going to go back. She's going to leave this life that she's living, which is not good. She's going to go back and have a somewhat normal life in their time of being a wife to this man. And so he's probably happy to see that. But then notice verse 4. It says, now his father-in-law, the young woman's father, detained him and stayed with him, and he stayed with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and lodged there. So they detained him. Well, it doesn't mean that he went and handcuffed him or something or tied him up. It means he urged him. He persuaded him to stay. He was doing his best to urge the man to stay with him. He's showing hospitality. Maybe he wants to spend some more time with his daughter and son-in-law before they leave. I don't know. But we do see that he compels them to stay. And on the 4th day, he gets up to leave. So that's verse 5. So it came to pass on the 4th day that he arose early in the morning and stood to depart. But the young woman's father said to his son-in-law, refresh your heart with a morsel of bread, and afterward go your way. So he sat down, and the two of them ate and drank together. Then the young woman's father said to the man, please be content to stay all night, and let your heart be merry. And when the man stood to depart, his father-in-law urged him, so he lodged there again. So this is just happening over and over again. He's saying, oh, why don't you just stop and sit down and eat? And then he urges him to stay. He's being hospitable, but we're not really given a reason why this happened. We're just told that he urged him to stay, and he stays several days. But we get to the last one. Look at verse... what verse did I get to? 8. Then he arose early in the morning on the 5th day to depart. But the young woman's father said, please refresh your heart. So they delayed until afternoon, and both of them ate. And when the man stood to depart, he and his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the young woman's father, said to him, look, the day is now drawing toward evening. Please spend the night. See, the day is coming to an end. Lodge here, and your heart may be merry. Tomorrow go on your way early, so that you may go home. However, verse 10, the man was not willing to spend that night, so he arose and departed and came opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. So, look at this, where we're sitting at in time, like in aerial geography, I guess we could say. So he's in Bethlehem, right? That's where his second wife's from, his concubine's from. He is from the mountains of Ephraim, which are right up here. This is probably a day's journey. If he left early in the morning, he could make it home. But it's now evening, okay? Is he going to go all night? No. What's he going to do? Well, he knows he's going to have to stay somewhere. This was a bad choice on his part because he should have stayed the night and then left early the next morning. And he could have made it all the way home, but he didn't. For some reason, he didn't. We're not told why. Maybe he was tired of staying with his father-in-law. He was ready to go home. I don't know. But we do know, verse 10, it says, he came opposite of Jebus. Now, Jebus, as it tells us here, is the old name for Jerusalem. But notice the rest of that verse. It says, with him were the two saddled donkeys. His concubine was also with him. Verse 11, They were near Jebus, and the day was far spent. And the servant said to his master, Come, please, and let us turn aside into this city of the Jebusites and lodge in it. But the master said to him, We will not turn aside here into a city of foreigners, who are not of the children of Israel, who we will go on to Gibeah. And so the city of Jebus, this is the old name for Jerusalem. And it was inhabited by the Jebusites. But if you go back in the book of Joshua, Joshua defeated the Jebusites. Joshua drove them out of this city of Jebus. But now, in the time of this period of time after Joshua is dead, where are the Jebusite people again? They're back. Who allowed them to do that? Well, the Judah and Bethlehem in this area, yeah, they should have, Judean people, trying to think of the right word to say here. The Judean people, God's people, were not supposed to allow them to take this back. But remember, all the way back Judges chapter 1, what did they not do? Drive everybody out. So they didn't drive everybody out. The Jebusites then go back and they inhabit Jebus. But what's interesting about this city of Jebus is, of course, later it's going to be captured by David, right? There's going to be her heroic thing that's done by one of David's men. And David's going to capture Jerusalem. He's going to change the name to Jerusalem from Jebus. And that, of course, is where the temple is going to be built. But notice also, somebody read Genesis 14 and verse 18. Genesis, what did I say, 14, 18? Yep.
Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God the Most High.
Okay, so here the king of Melchizedek, which remember who is Melchizedek? He was the high priest. Hebrews chapter, really several chapters of Hebrews, it talks about Melchizedek because Christ was after the order of Melchizedek, right? And in proving in the book of Hebrews why the old law was inferior and done away with, and how Christ could be a priest was because Abraham paid alms to the high priest, King Melchizedek. So all of that plays in part to Christ being our high priest today and being able to be a high priest, not after the order of Moses, but Melchizedek. But somebody read Psalm 76 and verse 2. We're talking about Jerusalem here, not Melchizedek really, but Psalm 76 and verse 2. All right, Zion is Jerusalem, right? Here in Psalm 76 and verse 2, it's called Salem because Salem is believed to be Jebus, which is Jerusalem. So it's got a long history. All the way back to the time of Abraham, this city was the home of Melchizedek, the high priest. And now we see the Jebusites, which are wicked people living here. And then later on, it's going to become Jerusalem. So there's just a lot of history there that I think is interesting with this city. But going back to this man, this Levite, he comes to Jebus. His servants say, well, let's just stay here with these people. Why did he not stay? Because they were not his own people. Interesting. He says, we're not going to stay in this city because there's wicked people here that are foreigners, that are not us. We're going to go to another place that has people that are us, which is a bad choice for him. And so that's the next verse. We go to 13. Thank you for keeping track. I need to leave my finger here. It says, so he said to his servant, come, let us draw near to one of these places and spend the night in Gibeah or Ramah. So Gibeah or Ramah is going to be in this area of Benjamin. This is right here. Ramah is right there. And so they're not going to go to Ramah, they're going to go to Gibeah. But that's that area. So he says, let's go to our people, which is the Israelites, and we're going to stay with them. And it was a part of Benjamin. So then 14 it says, and they passed by and went their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. They turned aside there to go into lodge in Gibeah. And he went in, he sat down in the open square of the city, for no one would take them into his house to spend the night. That's kind of odd. You say, okay, why did he not find a hotel or a lodge or something to stay in? They didn't have lodges. They didn't have places for people to stay like that. The only way that you were put up for the night is if someone offered to let you stay in their house. Think back to Lot and his family in Sodom and Gomorrah. When the angels came, where did they go and stay? Lot's house, right? They didn't have a lodge to stay in. They stayed at Lot's house. That's the same thing that's still going on here.
We're gonna stay in the square, just like
Yeah.
these people that Lot said.
Yep, Lot said not to. A lot of similarities here because they're going to stay. They don't have a place to stay. They have all the food and the things they need for their animals and stuff, but they don't have a place to stay. So they go to the square. That was something that was known during that time. If you stayed in the square, people would know you needed a place to live or a place to stay that night, and they would come and offer it to you if they were willing to. But in most cases, or some cases, they had to stay in the square all night. And so that brings us to verse 17. It says, verse 16, sorry. It says, just then an old man came in from his work in the fields at evening, who also was from the mountains of Ephraim. He was staying in Gibeah, whereas the men of the place were Benjamites. And when he raised his eyes, so what's that saying? It tells us he's a man from the same area as this Levite. He's just staying in Gibeah. He's not a Benjamite, but he knows the people here. It says, and when he raised his eyes, he saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, where are you going, and where did you come from? So he said to him, we are passing from Benjamin to Judah, toward the remote mountains of Ephraim. I am from there. I went to Bethlehem to Judah. Now I'm going to the house of the Lord. But there is no one who will take me into his house. So the old man sees him. He says, where are you going? Where are you from? He tells him. And he tells him he's going to the house of the Lord. What is that at this time? The tabernacle, right? The temple hasn't been made yet, but it's a tabernacle. Where is the tabernacle? Is it on our map? Let's see. The tabernacle is in Shiloh. Remember? Yeah, it is. So Shiloh is right here. So he says, the Mount Gerizim is here. This is the mountainous areas of Ephraim. And so he's in Bethlehem, went by Jerusalem. He's now up in this area of Ramah. But he says he's on his way to Shiloh, which is where the tabernacle is. Why would he be going to the house of the Lord? Who is he? He's a Levite. So good chance he was serving God in that area at the tabernacle. And so he's going back to where he lived. He's going back to do his job in service of the tabernacle. And so that's what he tells this old man. And so verse 19, he says, although we have both straw and fodder for our donkeys, and bread and wine for myself, for my female servant, and for the young men who is with your servant, there is no lack of anything. So he says we have everything we need, we just don't have a place to stay. Verse 20, and the old man said, peace be with you. However, let all of your needs be my responsibility. Only do not spend the night in the open square. Why do you think he said that? He knew what it was going to be like for them. Very similar to Lot, right? Lot lived in Sodom, and he knew what the city was like. It would probably have bothered this older man to go home knowing that he left this man in this square, knowing what was going to happen to him. And so he says, I'm going to protect him. I'm going to have him come to my house.
I have a question.
Yep.
He doesn't mention his wife there, just his female servant.
Yep.
So where's she at?
She's still with him.
Okay, so she's
But-
just like, I mean, she's below all of them clearly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a good catch, but he's right. You're right. He doesn't mention her at all.
Servants are above her, like she's not even mentioned.
Yeah.
Okay, but also, question to go along with that, there are sometimes, Abraham and Sarah, when they were traveling, referred to themselves as servants, like of Abimelech or whoever it was, so could it be that he's just referring to her
I don't think so. There is some, in my study of this, I did see some commentators that would said that he was trying to do kind of what Abraham did with Sarah and try not to associate himself with her because it might be a problem for him, kind of like Abraham did in saying she's my sister. I don't know if that's the case. It may be. It may be he's trying to hide the fact that she's his wife, and maybe he calls her his servant. But I think it's more along with what Lauren is saying, because of what he's going to do. He doesn't offer his female servant. He doesn't offer anything else. He offers his wife. And so I think he thinks of her pretty low, which is not good. And so I know we're out of time. We'll just finish verse 21. It says, and so he brought him into his house and gave fodder to the donkeys, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. So he's giving them everything they need, and he's allowing them to stay. And so we'll pick up next week, verse 22. And this is where the wicked